Hi, this is Peter connecting with medievalist.net, and we're here at the University of California at Pennsylvania, and we are at the Dancing with Death Wounds and Warfare, Wounds, and Disease in the Middle Ages conference. And we're here with Anthony Adams. He's an assistant professor of English at Brown University and one of the speakers at this event. And first of all, I just wanted to ask you about your new book, Discors, Machina. Violence, Trauma, and Narrative in Medieval Literature is coming out soon. Can you just tell us a little about it?
Well, Peter, thank you also for having me. This is a book that's attempting to answer a pretty basic question about how was violence depicted in the Middle Ages in poetry, in literature, and in art, primarily in poetry. What purpose did violence serve in the texts? My thesis, and it's not just mine, but I'm applying it to medieval texts for the first time, is the idea that violence serves as a structuring form. In other words, when people tell war stories, they don't actually tell the truth. They don't tell about real events or real people. Instead, they tell of what they think are real events and real people. Medieval writers are no different than modern soldiers. Medieval writers are attempting to tell the story of a violent battle or of some sort of cruel domestic dispute. And they reach for metaphors and narrative strategies that they have access to, which are not always realistic, of course. Many of them are highly metaphorical, highly even allegorical. And so my book is attempting to make sense of this in the early medieval period. I'll be having sections on Beowulf, on traumatic landscapes in the Middle Ages, traumatized objects, how individual objects might indeed reflect both violent activities and violent fears.
In developing this book, like what kind of the range of sources that you're available? Like early Middle Ages is what we consider less than the later Middle Ages in terms of written narrative sources. Beowulf is one of the major ones. But what are the kinds of sources you think you can make use of?
Well, Beowulf is certainly the fattest sheep of the early medieval period, especially in the north. And I am discussing Beowulf. But there are many other texts, both in Old English and in Latin, which are worthy of discussion. Many of the sources that I'll be looking at are Latinate sources. These were written in the 9th and 10th centuries, both in England and in France, what is modern-day France, and Germany, and describe various heroes' or nobility's approach to dealing with violent activity. In addition, there's many smaller Old English poems, and even some early Welsh poems, I think, that some of your readers will have heard of, about Welsh battles, most of which ended badly, of course. Some things never change. But there's an intense interest in depicting this sort of thing in the early period as well.
Now, your interest is in medieval literature. You went to your PhD at the University of Toronto. What got you interested in medieval literature in general, and then about this topic in particular?
Well, my interest in medieval literature is not, unlike many people, it does not really stem from a very early kind of love of the Middle Ages. I came at it quite late. I was exposed to it through a couple of professors of mine who really stressed the alterity, the otherness of the Middle Ages, the idea that this was a period in which men and women thought differently than we do today. I'm not sure how much of that I agree with now, but my initial interest was born from that, as well as the chance to learn lots of languages. Reading medieval texts requires you to learn a lot of different languages, including Latin. The interest in violence does not really come out of any kind of morbid experience, but out of the simple attempt to understand one particular poem. There was a poem written in the 9th century in France about the Viking siege of Paris. And in it, the author is attempting to make sense of this great tragedy that has befallen the city. Now, Paris at that time was not the most important of the cities in France, but it did have a symbolic value. And so this author who wrote this very long, over 1,300-line poem in Latin hexameters, is attempting to understand what it means when, say, the Vikings are winning, or when his own nobles are winning. And he's attempting to take the measure of his leaders and his own people in terms of how the battle is coming out. He wants to read some sort of moral significance into the Christians' victory over the heathens, and he's terrified at the thought that the heathens are actually going to win the day. Attempting to make sense of his mentality and his approach to the subject really got me started with the subject in general.
And finally, people know about texts like Beowulf, but would there be ones, a kind of a medieval text that you've enjoyed reading that you would suggest to our viewers that, or like a potential student or potential graduate student, and something that they should want to read just even for the enjoyment of it and also as a learning experience?
One of the texts, or group of texts that I recommend to everybody, especially my students, are any one of the Norse Sagas. And these are basically novels of the Middle Ages, long narratives in prose that concern families and the various dramas of the families. These are not really sagas of wars and of kings, but rather of individual people, most of whom were petty and some of whom were noble, and their attempt to make sense of their Icelandic Middle Ages. And they're very accessible texts. They really bear a close resemblance to our own realistic novels, I would imagine. And the other thing that they have going for them is this really sardonic sense of humor, whereas we think of the famous last words of cowboys or soldiers and how they have one last funny remark before they die. This sort of thing really starts in the Norse Sagas, where every man falls with an axe in his heart, but not before he makes a final joke.
Mm-hmm. I remember reading the Sardonic Sagas, and I always found that like a fascinating text.
Yeah, that's an exceptionally gruesome one.
Yes.
But something like Njal Saga or Laxdala Saga, which involves family romance as well as infighting, I think it would be a wonderful place to start.
Well, thank you much for your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.